For weeks, I had been thinking about taking a solo hike. It wasn't just any hike. I needed to get away. Away from the office, away from the emails piling up, away from the constant noise that never seemed to end. I wanted to spend a few nights in the forest, to hear nothing but the wind through the trees and my own breathing. There was a trail I had discovered in an old hiking forum deep in northern Idaho. The posts were few, some dating back years, but all described a quiet, rarely traveled path. Some hikers had made mention of small clearings where one could camp, but nothing official, no maps, no signs. That uncertainty drew me in. I packed lightly, bringing only a small backpack, a lightweight sleeping bag, a sleeping pad, my stove, a few canned meals, and water. I turned my phone off before leaving and left the charger at home. I didn't want distractions. The plan was simple: hike into the forest, set up a temporary camp at the first clearing, spend the night, and return the next morning. The morning was crisp, early sunlight filtering through the thin layer of clouds. The trailhead was almost invisible, a narrow break in the dense pines with a bare patch of dirt just enough to park my car. There were no other vehicles, no footprints, no indication anyone had been here recently. The stillness comforted me. I took a deep breath and started walking, my boots crunching on the dirt. The first 2 hours were peaceful. The trail was relatively flat, soft with fallen pine needles. Small birds hopped from branch to branch. A gentle breeze brushed against my face, and the quiet felt like a blanket. I walked without urgency, simply enjoying the solitude I had been craving. After about 2.5 hours, I reached a bend where the trail narrowed sharply, hemmed in by thick underbrush. I decided to take a break. I dropped my backpack beside a tree and leaned against the rough bark, taking small sips of water. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the calm sink in. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Across the small clearing, partially obscured by the trees, a man was standing. At first, I thought it might be another hiker who had arrived silently, but the way he held himself immediately felt wrong. He wasn't moving, just standing there, his posture rigid. I could barely make out his features at first, only the dark outline of his jacket and the slight curve of a hat. Instinctively, I froze. There was a split second where I couldn't tell if he was real, if I was imagining him. But then he lifted his hand slowly, almost deliberately, and waved. There was no warmth in the gesture, no friendliness. His arm moved mechanically, the motion measured and unnatural. He didn't smile. His eyes, when I finally caught a glimpse, were empty, void of any recognition. I stood slowly, keeping my movements calm. I didn't speak. I didn't acknowledge him. I picked up my backpack and started walking again, deliberately avoiding glancing back. My pace wasn't a run, but my steps quickened, a subconscious urge to put distance between us. Every sense was heightened. The sound of my boots, the wind through the trees, the subtle crack of a branch underfoot. I felt his presence behind me, even though I couldn't see him. I continued along the trail, reaching the first clearing intended for a small campsite. The sun had started to dip below the treetops, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson. I needed to eat. I set up my stove, boiled water, and opened a can of beans. I had just started when I heard the crunch of leaves behind me. My stomach dropped. He was closer now. There was no doubt. The same man, moving slowly but steadily, had positioned himself just beyond the clearing. I didn't need to look fully. Instinct told me he was watching. And then he did something even more unsettling. He lowered himself to sit near the edge of the clearing, just far enough to seem casual, as though we were two friends sharing a meal. His voice cut through the quiet like ice. "You're heading far tonight?" he asked, soft and measured. "Carrying anything useful?" The question sounded mundane, but something in the cadence made my blood run cold. He wasn't asking to make conversation. He was taking inventory. I told him I wasn't hungry, and he offered something from a small tin he carried. I hesitated, seeing the faint smell of rust and age. The contents were unidentifiable, the faint metallic odor turning my stomach. I declined firmly, and he merely nodded, smiling without expression. I packed quickly and resumed walking. This time, I looked back more cautiously, but he was gone. Still, a deep unease followed me like a shadow. Each rustle in the bushes, each broken twig, made me flinch. My pace quickened, but I tried to remain calm. By nightfall, I had reached the second clearing, larger and more open. I didn't set up my tent fully. I simply laid my sleeping pad beneath a thick pine tree. I tried to focus on the sounds of the forest, the wind, the distant call of an owl, but it felt unnatural, almost suppressed. The night was too quiet, a void that seemed to stretch endlessly. And then, footsteps, dry leaves snapping under deliberate weight. I didn't need to see him. Instinctively, I knew. The steps stopped briefly, as if measuring the distance, then resumed closer, slow and purposeful. I froze, my hands gripping my backpack tightly. "You haven't eaten yet," he said, his voice calm, soft, but cold. My blood ran cold. I didn't respond. My mind raced. Was he following me? How long had he been shadowing my movements? Every instinct screamed to flee, but the darkness made the trail confusing. I could hear him moving back and forth, pausing near the trees, circling in silence, observing. I waited until I thought he had moved away, then picked up my backpack and carefully moved deeper into the forest. I avoided the main trail, hoping to break the pattern, to make it impossible for him to anticipate my path. My breathing was uneven, my heart hammering, but I forced myself to remain silent. I set up a temporary shelter beneath a fallen tree, keeping my bag within arm's reach. I left the flap of my tent slightly open. There was no light except the faint moon filtering through the canopy. Minutes passed. Then came the sound again. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving toward me, then stopping. I held my breath, muscles tense, waiting. They faded slowly, leaving an echo that seemed louder than the reality. I didn't sleep. I sat upright, flashlight in hand, listening to the faint creaks of the forest. Hours passed. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I dozed lightly, only to wake intermittently to imagined sounds, each one making me tense. At dawn, I left the makeshift shelter as quickly as I could. I didn't look back. My legs burned from the uneven terrain, but I kept going until the familiar edge of the trailhead appeared. My car waited silently in the dim light. I opened the door, threw my backpack inside, and got in. Just as I started the engine, my eyes caught movement at the tree line far off, barely distinguishable. A figure stood there, unmoving, watching. I didn't linger. I hit the gas and left the forest behind. The image seared into my mind. Even now, I think about that man, the way he moved, the silence he carried with him. I don't know if I was ever truly alone, or if he had been following me long before I noticed. And some nights, when the wind rustles through the trees outside my apartment, I can still hear the soft crunch of footsteps, measured, deliberate, just beyond my awareness. The road stretched ahead, empty, winding through thick pines that swayed lazily in the afternoon breeze. I told myself the isolation was peaceful, the quiet a balm for a mind always cluttered with noise. My tires hummed against asphalt, a steady rhythm that matched my heartbeat. Somewhere ahead, a leaf danced across the road, and I pressed the brakes gently, letting it drift away, unbothered. By the time I reached the cabin, sunlight had begun to tip over the horizon, spilling gold across the wooden shingles. I parked, letting the engine die, and stepped onto the gravel. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, the kind of scent that felt alive and old at once. I carried my bag inside, noting the small comforts of the place. Dust motes floated lazily in the sunlight, streaming through the windows. A wind chime hung by the door, tinkling faintly whenever a breeze whispered past. I set the kettle on the stove and poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug. Steam curled upward, soft and warm. The radio murmured an old melody, one that I almost remembered, almost belonged to me. I sank into the chair by the window, journal open on my lap, pen idle for a moment as I watched the trees sway. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. And then the knock came. It was gentle, hesitant, polite. I froze mid-sip, the warmth of coffee suddenly burning my hand. The sound had a human rhythm, precise, deliberate. I was alone, I told myself, of course. But still, the knot of unease in my chest tightened. "Hello?" I called. The word sounded hollow in the spacious cabin. Silence answered me. Only the wind in the pines whispered back. I stepped to the door, hand brushing the smooth wood. Nothing moved outside, yet when I turned back, my eyes caught a leaf, unnaturally curled, resting on the windowsill. I had not seen it there before. My mind tried to dismiss it. Probably the wind, probably nothing. But a small part of me knew it was the first hint of something wrong. Night fell faster than I expected. Shadows stretched across the cabin walls like dark fingers, brushing against every familiar surface. Then came the soft thud outside, subtle, almost a rhythm, too deliberate for a branch, too quiet for an animal. I opened the door cautiously. A man stood there, tall, soaked, eyes darting to the edges of the tree line. His jacket clung to his frame, muddy at the hems, yet his shoes were impossibly clean. "Lost?" I asked, voice firmer than I felt. "Maybe," he replied. I was camping nearby. Could I get some water?" His voice was uneven, words spaced strangely as if testing the air, testing me. He smiled, but it was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Something was off. I handed him a bottle, my fingers trembling slightly. He accepted it, drank, and thanked me, not with comfort, but with observation. The quiet that followed was heavier than any noise. I tried to ignore it, told myself he would leave, that the pines would reclaim the calm. But even after he departed, a shadow of unease clung to the cabin, curling into corners I hadn't noticed before. I attempted sleep, though the quiet of the night felt unnatural, almost measured. Each creak of the cabin floor made my heart jump. Each gust of wind rattling the windows felt like a signal. I swore I saw movement at the edge of the clearing, just a flicker in the corner of my vision. I approached the window. Nothing. only trees swaying under the moonlight, brittle shadows tracing the earth. I convinced myself he was gone, but when I closed the curtains, I caught my reflection. Slightly off, slightly wrong. A small shiver traced my spine. Hours stretched. The night became infinite. The hum of the fridge, once mundane, now deafened me. I checked the doors, windows, even the car parked outside. Nothing, but the feeling of being watched persisted. My phone had no signal. The generator sputtered and died. Escape was impossible. I paced, listening. Every tiny snap of a branch, every rustle in the undergrowth sounded like intent. Helplessness wrapped around me, a tangible force pressing down, testing the edges of my sanity. I curled into bed, eyes wide, ears straining. I could feel him circling just beyond vision, patience in human form. Dawn arrived reluctantly. Pale light bled through the windows, washing the cabin in soft gold. I forced myself to stand, heart pounding, every muscle taut. Outside, near the tree line, he waited, watching. I stepped onto the porch, voice steady. "Who are you?" He did not respond. Only the faint glint of a knife caught the morning light. The realization struck me fully. He had intended harm, and the night's terror had not been imagined. Adrenaline surged. I ran. Tires spun on gravel, the engine groaning but holding. Only when the cabin was far behind me did I glance back. He had vanished, leaving only footprints that traced a deliberate circle around the cabin. I found signal down the road and called the authorities. They arrived later, scouring the area. The knife remained near the cabin, silent, accusing. The man was gone. I did not sleep for days, but I survived. I knew now the danger had been real, flesh and intent beneath the shadow. The forest returned to its quiet rhythms, the pines swaying, the birds singing, but the memory remained, an echo in my mind that would not fade. The road ahead was long, empty, but I drove with a measured breath. I had escaped, and the danger was behind me, for now. The sun was just slipping below the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and pink. I carried my pack along the overgrown trail, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot mingling with the distant hum of cicadas. The forest felt endless, ancient, and oddly silent, as if the trees themselves were holding their breath. I had chosen this section of Cedar Trail for its remoteness. There were no official roads, no nearby cabins, just a GPS dot somewhere on my phone and the promise of solitude. I set up my campsite in a small clearing. The fire crackled to life, sending up ribbons of smoke that curled lazily into the dusk. I dug into my backpack for a small notebook and a pen, jotting down observations about the trail, the weather, the birds I thought I had seen earlier. The act of writing felt grounding, a small tether to the normalcy I relied on so heavily in daily life back home. Cooking a simple meal, I stirred the contents of my pot over the fire, inhaling the faint aroma of vegetables and broth. The forest seemed to settle around me. A branch snapped somewhere off trail, probably a deer. A breeze shifted the leaves overhead. I breathed deeply. Alone, yes, but completely at ease. Night fell. The firelight drew long shadows around me, turning familiar shapes into strange silhouettes. I zipped my tent and crawled inside, the walls of canvas warm and comforting. The forest beyond became a dark blur, trees forming black spires against the night sky. My phone, turned off to preserve battery, lay beside me. Wi-Fi and cell signal were non-existent, but I didn't care. This was the point of it all. to disconnect. Hours passed. Somewhere deep in the trees, a rustle caught my attention. I paused, heart picking up slightly, perhaps a fox, perhaps a raccoon. But the sound repeated, deliberate and low, as if someone or something was moving just beyond the ring of firelight. I shook my head, telling myself the trail was alive with creatures, yet the unease lingered, a subtle vibration beneath my skin. The first real hint came when a branch snapped close to my tent. Louder this time. Closer I froze, listening. There was nothing beyond the immediate rustle, and yet I felt watched. My eyes darted to the edge of the firelight. For a brief moment I thought I saw a figure, a man, tall, unmoving, standing among the trees. And then he was gone. I convinced myself it was imagination. I had read too many online horror accounts. My mind was playing tricks in the dark. Still, sleep refused me. Every snapping twig, every shifting shadow felt purposeful. By midnight, I was certain of it. There was someone in the forest, someone moving slowly, deliberately, staying just out of sight. I unzipped the tent and peeked through the mesh. Nothing visible, yet my gut told me he was there. I could sense him circling, waiting, studying, a soft whisper of movement, then silence. I tried to rationalize. Maybe a hiker lost like me, maybe a local tracker, maybe someone camping further down the trail. But his presence didn't feel benign. It felt flat, unnatural. Watching me, testing me. Hours crawled forward. I double-checked my tent, my small supplies, the little clearing I had claimed for myself. My hand shook slightly as I realized the fire had been disturbed. Small twigs rearranged, ashes slightly scattered, evidence of someone else's proximity. My notebook lay where I had left it, but a single page was bent, edges torn. The realization hit hard. This wasn't random. Someone had been inside my camp, close enough to see my belongings, close enough to read my notes if they had wanted. My pulse spiked. Fear, sharp and raw, gripped me. I stayed awake, listening. The rustling came again, now on the far side of the clearing, moving slowly, methodically. I grabbed my flashlight, heart hammering. Each sweep of the beam caught nothing, only trees, leaves, and the occasional small animal. But the feeling persisted. He was still there, circling, patient, silent. Dawn approached. Pale light seeped through the treetops, washing the clearing in a muted glow. Exhausted, I stepped out of the tent, scanning the perimeter carefully. The ground near the trail had footprints, boots, large, deliberate, circling my campsite. They stopped suddenly at the tree line, as if he had melted into the forest itself. I examined my belongings. Nothing was missing, but the bent notebook page and scattered ashes were undeniable proof. Someone had been inside my camp, had observed me, had left their mark. The fear that had kept me awake all night shifted into action. I packed quickly, deliberately trying not to make noise. My flashlight scanned the trail as I moved, every snap of a branch, every whisper of the wind putting me on edge. I kept my GPS device in hand, mapping a path back to the nearest ranger station, calculating distance and timing. The forest, once serene and comforting, now felt alive with potential threat. Every step I took, I imagined him watching, somewhere just out of sight. The trail ahead was uneven, overgrown, but I moved with purpose, ignoring the fatigue that weighed on my legs. My thoughts raced. How long had he been observing me? Did he know I was alone? Would he follow? I reached the edge of the overgrown clearing. A final look back, confirmed my worst suspicion. Shadows shifting among the pines, a silhouette standing perfectly still, eyes seemingly trained on me. I couldn't see features, only the outline of someone tall, patient, waiting. And then he disappeared into the trees. The ranger station was a mile down the dirt road, a small wooden structure with peeling paint and a bell above the door. I ran the last stretch, heart pounding, sweat soaking my shirt. The door creaked open under my hand, and I was greeted by the smell of coffee and a radio murmuring soft country tunes. The receptionist looked up, puzzled, as I gasped out my story. Authorities were called. I led them back along the trail to my campsite, flashlight cutting through the morning fog. The disturbed ashes, bent notebook page, and footprints circling the clearing were still there, evidence undeniable, tangible. The forest had not swallowed them. They were proof. Yet the man himself was gone. Despite search teams scouring the area, checking for vehicles or signs of departure, he had vanished completely. Nothing in the records, nothing caught on the trail cameras, nothing to explain who he was or why he had watched me so carefully. I left Cedar Trail that day with a mix of relief and lingering fear. The solitude I had cherished before now carried a permanent shadow. Even in the bright sunlight of the ranger station parking lot, I felt eyes lingering in the distance, watching, patient, calculating. And though I made it back safely, the questions remain. How long had he been following me? Did he know every detail of my movements? And perhaps most chilling of all, would he return? The forest was quiet again, deceptive in its calm. But I knew better now. Solitude here was a choice fraught with risk. And somewhere deep in the trees, someone had been waiting all along.